Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. We hope that by the end of it, you will have a better idea of how to complete your applications for pupillage and perhaps a better understanding of where you need to look in order to prioritise your particular skills. We have with us today Liam. He is a family law barrister at Dean's Court Chambers in Manchester. Liam specialises in financial remedy proceedings and came to a bar following a career outsourcing in which he lived and worked in the UK and overseas. Liam, would you like to say hello, and is there anything else you'd like people to know about you?
Hello. I'm sure I will share more as we go along, Joe.
Thank you, Liam. And Jola, who's with us today as well, he's a junior tenant at St Ives Chambers. He completed his common law pupillage in October 2025 and is practicing in all of Chambers' main areas, that is to say crime, family, housing and business and property. So he's the person who's nearest to what you're going through and will have the most sympathy. And Jola, is there anything else you'd like to share at the moment?
No, thank you, Cheryl. Happy to be here.
And I'm Cheryl Jones. I'm a senior junior at 3PB Barristers. I was called in 1996, so it's a long, long time since I went through the processes. I do mainly property, probate and insolvency work. I sit as a recorder and as a deputy ICC judge. I was head of pupillage for 9 years with 3PB, so I've got considerable experience from the other end. Between us and our different experiences, we hope to be able to give you a very clear idea of the best way to prepare and present yourselves and how to communicate your skills to Chambers in the best way possible. The way we're going to deal with this today is this. We've gone through all the questions that were raised in advance, and they've been divided into approximate groupings. We won't be dealing with questions that are very theoretical. We won't be dealing with questions that have been asked of specific members of Chambers in reference to their particular application process, or ones that are better asked of the Bar Standards Board or the Bar Council Immigration Support Services. The email addresses for those will be in the chat. We've also been asked several technical questions, which frankly are better answered by the existing resources on the Pupillage Gateway microsite. So please, again, see the links in the chat for that. Thank you, Tatiana. Tatiana is working to add everything and keep an eye on what's happening in the chat. We've received some questions relating to the pupillage interview processes. We won't be answering those because there's a second session running on Tuesday, the 24th of February, 2026, specifically on the interview process. And those questions relating to interviews can be asked and answered then. Moving on a little bit, as I said earlier, there's a significant overlap between some areas and questions. So even if we don't answer specific questions in an area, they may be covered when answering others. They may be covered in other areas. So if you have a specific interest, please listen carefully to everything. And please remember this as well, much as we would like to, there are quite a few people who've signed up to this, and we can't answer every question that was sent in. And there's two other things that we would like you to bear in mind as well during this whole process. The first one is this: there is no single answer. There is no single magic bullet. At the end of the day, Chambers have different processes and may be looking for different qualities. We have, all three of us, had different experiences. There's also a measure of luck involved. However, the harder and more carefully you prepare, the luckier you are likely to get. And one other thing, this can be very dispiriting, the whole process. Chambers have to make very difficult decisions, and it can be very disappointing if you don't succeed at first. But please remember, it's not a reflection of you as a person or of your worth or your value. It is the need for chambers to make hard choices. When I was head of pupillage, I used to spend every spring feeling as if I was strangling kittens. It was heartbreaking, the people that I could not give pupillage to, because we're very limited in the number of pupillages we can hand out. It is not easy trampling on people's dreams, and we don't do it with a glad heart. It may feel personal, but it is not. And hold on to that, because you need to maintain your confidence and belief in yourself, and that can be difficult. So let's see if we can make it a little easier for you. So we're going to start off with some what we've roughly called application processes, do's and don'ts. I'm going to go first. So it's a double-sided question. It's the first question that I'm going to answer. And the first part of it is this. What is the biggest mistake people make when filling in application forms? Well, there are many, many mistakes you can make. But I think for me, the biggest one is not thinking about what Chambers is actually asking for, not reading the question properly. Analyze every question. Answer the question that's asked, not the one you wish you'd been asked. Do not second guess. Do not think they mean something else. And don't be rude or dismissive. We once had somebody who told us in writing that he considered that the question we asked was very weak, of how not to impress your Chambers. And then he went on to tell us something we'd not asked about, and we couldn't mark it because the marking schemes for Chambers will be very much linked to the questions and the qualities that they're asking. And the second half of that is what makes people stand out negatively, and it would be nice to know the flip side of that as well. Well, again, it's a very wide question, but my answer to that would be this. Any application which is lazy, with bad spelling, grammar, or bad use of language, any application which is arrogant or seems to say that the person does not need to learn anything is likely to be treated with great suspicion. I've been a barrister for 28 years. I'm still learning. Be confident, but know you still have a long, long way to go. This is a job which never ends. You never reach peak and stop. You keep going. The flip side is a well-presented application with accurate answers, readable, well thought through, and which demonstrates your personality, your drive, and your abilities will almost always get an interview, provided you have the academics and are able to link your abilities to the qualities required for a barrister. Now, I'm going to stop talking for a moment. Angela, it's your turn. I'm going to pick on you now. Angela, what are the common mistakes that international students make in their applications that make them fail to stand out? And can I just add to that, is there a way they can best present their overseas credentials?
Thanks, Cheryl. I think my answer to that question is within the second question, because the common mistake, I think, is not spelling out how any overseas grading systems equate to their UK equivalents. The principle is generally you want to assist your marker, so you can be rewarded for hopefully your excellent grades. So whatever the equivalent might be, I don't know where you might find them, but I think a cursory Google search might do so, might tell you how, I don't know, whatever international grading system.
For example, a 4.0 in America would be the equivalent of a first class degree here.
If 4.0
yes.
is the highest,
yes.
then it must be then.
Yeah.
It must follow. Similarly, if Chambers is still asking for A-level grades and you did the IB, you might want to say how that roughly tracks. UCAS has accurate equivalent on their website, I believe. And so that's probably the mistake. And in terms of how to set it out, I would set out the grades and then perhaps beneath it, which is the equivalent to, or in brackets, which is the equivalent to XYZ.
Okay, thank you. And what would you say, Angela, is the biggest challenge for applicants when completing the application form as an international student?
I think as an international student, you're probably conscious, as I was, of showing that you're committed to the UK bar whilst balancing that against bringing all this different experience that you might have from overseas. Well, I think the way to overcome that challenge is to embrace it. If you think about what your elevator pitch is, and I know it's cliche elevator pitches, but basically, how do you fit in with what you're trying to achieve? When you go to an interview or when you're writing an application, can you say in a couple of words how the experience you bring, how that's going to be particularly useful to what that Chambers' mission is? So it's difficult, but I think it starts by knowing your CV really, really well, knowing the strengths of that and knowing the weaknesses of that. And by the time you've done all that thinking and reflecting, you'll probably be able to put that, if you have your elevator pitch down, every answer you write up in a written application will be punchy and pointed with that knowledge to hand.
Thank you. That's very helpful, I think. Liam, I'm going to turn to you, not so much in terms of the international experience, although I know you've worked overseas, but what would you say about how to make the most of work experience on the Gateway applications generally?
Yeah, I think the thing to think about is that things that you've done at work have a direct impact on your application and the skills that you can highlight through your work experience. I worked out in Malaysia, but a big part of that was running call centers, and what that does is that meant that I spoke to loads and loads of different people over the telephone as there was sort of escalations, complaints, etc. What that allowed me to do is work out how best to communicate with different types of people from different organizations or different consumers. And so it's about taking a step back, thinking about the job that you've done and what are the skills and experience that I can learn from. I'm sure we'll probably deal with this a bit later, but for example, working in a bar, and lots of students will work in a bar, you will have developed skills that you might not even think about, such as conflict resolution when you're dealing with customers who may be having an argy-bargy, or you will have dealt with time management when you're trying to manage your studies and working. You will have developed your communication skills by working with people and the general public. So it's really important that you're not just setting out, this is my work experience and this is where I've worked between these dates and that dates. It's really important that every answer you give is providing another reason for
Mhm.
Chambers to think, oh, that they've applied thought to what have they gained, what are their skills that they've gained from that work experience. Because of course, for many people at their application stage, their experience of work is likely to be part-time jobs whilst at university
Mhm.
or perhaps in the gap year. So I think that's probably the way I would approach it.
That I think is very helpful. And Jola, is there anything you'd like to add to that particular question? Because I think it is quite an interesting one.
Yeah, no, I think what Liam said about not underestimating your experience is probably the biggest advice you could probably take from here. But in terms of that, obviously has to be pointed and has to be relevant when you do the thinking beforehand. So there's got to be a lot of thinking that goes in before you just start writing. Then you understand how that experience fits within whatever criteria Chambers is asking for. So don't undersell yourself, don't
Mm.
underestimate your experience, but do a lot of the thinking beforehand.
Yes, there's a tendency, isn't there, for people to think, oh, barrister, as if it's something incredibly special. And yes, obviously it's something incredibly special, but it's based, isn't it, on the normal human needs for communication, for the ability to get on with people. And you can get that from all sorts of places, as you said, Liam, from bar work, from doing perhaps working in an office. You learn not so much conflict resolution, but you might learn how workflows are experienced, how things need to be organized. Because I think one of the things, and I don't know if you two would agree with me on this. One of the things that's sometimes underestimated and is often not mentioned in application forms is the ability to organize. Because I would say, and I don't know if you two would agree with me, that the ability to organize yourself, your thoughts, your work, not just in terms of time, but physically, if you like, on your computer, it is quite important.
I would agree with you because unlike many professions, you're unlikely to have an ongoing supervisor who is making sure you're dotting the I's and crossing the T's as you should. And you will and can be juggling many cases at one time, and you simply can't allow your email inbox to run to 300 unread emails. You've got to be sort of on top of it. And so I think you're absolutely right. Being able to organize and manage your time effectively so that you can meet the commitments of the job, it is really important. And you can demonstrate that, of course, Cheryl, as you are going through your studies, if you're working part-time, extracurricular activities, etc. You don't have to necessarily have a long list of work experience, in my view.
Absolutely. And that sort of segues a little bit into one of the questions that we were asked, which is almost about organization. And this is how to format questions when answering them or when filling in the application forms. So one can use one's experience for that. So to format questions, to put them together carefully and in an organized way based on what you've already said, Angela, about making sure you know yourself and using your experience. I think one of the most difficult points, and somebody did raise this, is how do you answer the questions? Do you use bullet points? Do you use paragraphs? Are you narrative? And I think that it does unfortunately depend on the question. I think if there's a question like, tell us about a situation you needed to resolve, which is a question that comes up sometimes, that needs to be a paragraph, because in that you're trying to tell a story. If it's something about, tell us what you learned on your mini pupillages, you can, it actually comes over better in a bullet point form. I learned to be surprised at the way the judge and barristers interact with each other is quite a common one that comes up, but it's also a good learning point. And tell us about your mini pupillages. I'll just throw in an extra one here for you. Don't just tell us which mini pupillages you went on. Do tell us what you actually did there, and what you took from it and what you took away from it. Now, the next question that comes, and we are going to move fairly quickly, I think, through some of these sections, because although we do have, I think, an hour and a half, that can be.
Cheryl, can I just pick up on that last point?
Yes,
that
of
you
course.
made? Can I just say this to everybody? The word limit is a limit. It's not a target. And some of the best applications that I've seen in my role in recruitment have been short, snappy, but concise answers. And being concise is a big part of this job.
Yeah.
Because judges want you to tell them what the problem is and how they can assist you. They don't want war and peace necessarily. And so good, concise answers. The word limit's not a target. It is what it says, it's the limit.
That is a very good point. Yes, don't use fillers. And if I can add something else, because I don't think anybody's asked a question on this. So one of my particular bugbears is the use of superlatives. Things like incredibly or extraordinarily or any other superlative you can think of. Don't put them in. They're just annoying. We'll decide whether it's extraordinary. The person who's reading it decides whether it's extraordinary or... So write clearly, concisely, and as you say, it's a limit, not a target, like speed limits.
If I could add, because
Yes,
I
of
agree
course,
with
Angela.
what's already been said. I had a mentor when I was in bar school, and he said that what was in vogue at the time at the bar was deleting adverbs from skeleton arguments. So you've written your whole skeleton, and you just delete every adverb, and
Absolutely.
you basically realize that all the sentences can stand alone without the adverbs. They effectively add nothing. And I've just used an adverb there effectively. And it probably
But if you need one, you can put one back in.
Of course.
But yes, this is a very strong something or another. No, just put strong. You don't need the very. You don't even necessarily always need the strong. Just so adjectives as well. Treat with very great caution. Clear, precise English is absolutely the lodestar for this. So, Angela, in terms of the word limit, how do you say it should be dealt with?
You mean the work experience section?
No, yes, the word limit in terms of things. How you've already said cut out adverbs. Is there anything else you would say you can cut out and still be crisp and clear with?
Yeah, I think metaphors, cut
Yes.
out adverbs, metaphors, certainly any dead metaphors,
Yes.
i.e., those that are so run of the mill that they almost don't paint the vivid picture that metaphors are intended to. Add in topic sentences because that really focuses what it is you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Use short sentences, use words that are easily understood.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more so, I think if you positively write in that way, then you will have less to cut out because you're already writing concisely.
Yes. I think it's quite a good idea to write it out, leave it for a while, come back, or ask a friend to read it, and cut out anything that really doesn't add anything. Every word, pretty much, should be something you want the chambers to know or to have. So the fewer filler words or redundant words, the better. Okay. So when filling out the application form, there's always a question, isn't there, about mini pupillages. And we've had a number of questions about mini pupillages and scholarships. I'm going to take on the mini pupillage questions because I have to say, quite a lot of experience about marking application forms and going through sometimes endless mini pupillages. So I've seen those who've done vast numbers and those who've done none or virtually none. There are questions, two questions effectively, but they are, I'm going to put them into effectively one. So the question is this: if I had not completed any mini pupillages, is it still possible to secure a pupillage? So there are two separate issues in that particular question. So either you've got no mini pupillage with a specific chambers that you're applying to, which is one issue, or you've got no mini pupillages at all, which is a completely different issue. So in terms of the first one, most chambers actually don't require you to have done a mini pupillage with them before you apply. Most chambers, it makes no difference whether you've had mini pupillages with them or not. There are some chambers which make it a requirement before you can apply that you must have done a mini pupillage. I think it's becoming less common because it raises some quite serious fair recruitment issues, to be honest, because it's sifting people out based on their availability at specific times, and therefore limited opportunities for people to actually do the mini pupillages. But I would say the vast majority of chambers, including mine, don't give any weight at all to minis with chambers. There's no feedback on it. There's nothing gets into the system about what you said or didn't say, or what happened or did excuse me, or didn't happen in your mini pupillages. So it's not really too much of a problem. The second issue is probably a bit more problematic because the difficulty there is if you've done no mini pupillages at all, if you've not been into chambers, if you've not experienced chambers life even as a mini pupil or on a one-day experience or anything like that, unless you have some exceptional other work experience that fills that in, you have little idea about the actual role you're applying for. because what's seen on the outside is actually quite different from what's on the inside, like every profession. What one has a particular idea. I know I did before I came to the bar, and then you find out it's perhaps not quite as shiny as you thought it was. It's still great, but it's not quite as shiny as you thought it was. It's very hard to get mini pupilages, I know, and it's got harder because the Bar Council now doesn't, and most chambers don't allow the informal work shadowing that used to take place as well. So it can be quite difficult. You need to at least demonstrate that you've made an effort. If there are good reasons why you haven't been able to do it, I mean, I had very limited mini pupilages before I came to the bar. And the reason for that was I came to the bar as a mature student. I had children. I was working during the holidays whilst at university. And so and I was in the north of England in Lancaster. So my opportunities were extremely limited. I did manage to get 2 or 3, that was it. So if there are reasons, mention it in your application. I'm sorry. You'd have to turn off my
Sorry, Cheryl. I completely agree in terms of what Cheryl said. I think in terms of mini pupilages, if you think about the purpose of all the experiences, so that it doesn't become buzzwordy, think mini pupilages have, I think, four purposes. I'd say to learn about life at the bar, to learn about practice at the bar at that chambers, to observe oral advocacy, and to demonstrate commitment to the bar. And many people are not the only way to demonstrate any of that. You can go to learn about the bar generally. You can go to talks about life at the bar. The inns put these on pupillage fairs. To learn about chambers specifically, you can attend their open evenings. You can look at pupillage brochures. To learn about oral advocacy, you can go to court physically, or you can even go to court from the comfort of your home, because the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court live stream almost every case. And I think they're even introducing skeleton arguments to be published. And you might see a skeleton argument online and then email a barrister who's the author of it about a point you want to learn more about. And I think you can demonstrate a commitment to the bar by doing all of the above. The only thing missing, really, to my mind, is the chambers aspect, which would be difficult without a mini pupillage. But I hope that's somewhat encouraging, that it's not the be all and end all, I think.
I think that's right. And I think all I would add to that is that you should be using each mini pupillage experience, if you are doing more than one, to try and narrow down what you do or do not like about chambers and or area of law. So I managed to do a fair few because it was slightly different to what it is now. It's far more competitive than it was a few years ago when I was doing them. And I managed to do a series of them, narrowing down, well, what practice areas do I like? What kinds of things do I like in chambers? What don't I like? I was managed to sort of create a funnel that by the time I came to apply, I knew that I wanted to apply to family work only, so that I knew that I could narrow my applications down to focusing on that. And that allowed me then to sort of tailor the research and the steps I was taking to apply for family law pupillage. Because I'd used my experiences on mini pupillage to narrow down what it was I liked and didn't like. Now, it won't be the same for everybody, but you should be using each mini pupillage as an opportunity to think, what did I like? What didn't I like? And what have I taken away from that? Because as Cheryl was saying earlier, there's no point going on a mini pupillage and just putting, I did mini pupillage at Dean's Court Chambers between these dates. So what? With the greatest respect, so have lots of other people. What did you learn? What was it about Chambers, or what was it about the case that you saw that sort of inspired you or motivated you, or you know, don't we want to know what it was you took away, as opposed to just merely having the badge of having done a mini pupillage, because that, with respect, isn't going to help your application. But saying, I attended at local county court with Mr. Kelly and was surprised by how costs are dealt with, because I didn't realize they were done in this way. I've gone away and read about it, and now I know about how costs are dealt with after an application, for example. You must be much more concise than I was there. This was on the hoof. But set out what it is you've learned, because most people applying for pupillage will have done some sort of mini pupillage or work shadowing, and so every time you're answering a question, this doesn't just apply to the mini pupillage section. You've got to think about, does this set me apart? Does this answer set me apart? If this answer does not set me apart, what do I need to do to make it better?
There's nothing like having two good wingmen, is there? Thank you. I do apologise. I do have a little bit of the current cold that's going around, and my throat is misbehaving. Move on to the next one. Angela, can you tell us how an applicant can demonstrate a genuine understanding of Chambers' work?
I think there are various ways. People will always say mini pupillages are a good insight in terms of understanding the work they do, but I think the cases they do, uh, if they're public, any high-profile ones in the news, you might want to read around that. Talk to their competitors if you know any of them. So if you have a mentor, say, "Oh, what do you think about this Chambers? They practice in your area," and they might give you some sort of insight in terms of, "Oh, these are the stakeholders they usually act for within an area." What they attend their webinars, if they do any, because that's how they're presenting themselves to solicitors, and that's quite a telling sign in terms of the work they actually do. If they have a podcast, listen to their podcast, and go to talks and basically compile your market research. I think at the start, Cheryl talked about there being no silver bullet. Understanding in depth the type of work Chambers does is not an overnight job on Chambers and Partners, although that's a very good starting point. I think it's the type of market research that's created over a period of time, uh, from speaking to people on the ground, and from consuming all the online resources I've already mentioned.
I just think I want to add to something Angela said, because he's absolutely right. And Cheryl, having spent many years on the Pupillage Committee, will know this. There is nothing more disheartening for a Chambers than receiving an application that says, I would like to pursue a commercial chancery practice, when you operate from a common law set that does not do commercial chancery practice. And so the research of the chambers that you're applying to is really important, because you are mistaken to think that all chambers do everything, because we simply don't. Some chambers will. You'll have some really broad chambers that deal with lots, like 3PB, which is where Sherlock is a very big chambers that deals with lots of different areas of law. But Dean's Court Chambers in Manchester, we're very much a common law set, so we deal with civil, family, and crime, which is sort of a traditional a common law set. I suspect, Angela, it's the same where you are, isn't it? And so it's really important that you look at the people that are there, the kind of work that they're doing in reported cases, and knowing what practice areas are actually covered. And I'll be honest, that's really straightforward, because if you go to a Chambers website, it is a marketing tool for solicitors to find barristers. And so we will spell out what practice areas each individual or each Chambers covers, because we hope that they're going to come and use us rather than somebody else. And so really paying attention to what each Chambers does is really important, because it's becoming more and more common, I think, Cheryl, I think you'd probably agree,
I
more
do,
and more common
yes.
that sets are specializing in one area only. And so you need to be really alive to those sets that are only doing one particular type of work.
Yeah, absolutely right. I agree with everything you've both said. Now, Liam, I'm going to come back to you on something else, which a number of people have asked, which is this: what experiences should people be highlighting on their application forms? And as part of that, is mooting, in your experience, a make or break thing to do?
I'll start with the mooting question. Um, Lots of aspiring barristers moot. I mooted all through university and at the bar course. And I enjoyed it, but it also takes a lot of time to prepare to moot and to learn how to do it and um, to do the research that's required. That won't be possible for everybody. Some people will have multiple jobs to fund their way through university. They may have caring responsibilities. It may simply be not accessible to you. But what skills do mooting give you? Well, mooting give you research skills. If you've completed a degree, written a dissertation, you will have developed those skills, and you can highlight them in another way. They give you oral advocacy skills. You may well have developed them in a different way. That might be through a negotiating competition. It might be through having volunteered at the Citizens Advice Bureau, for example. So mooting is not make or break. There will always be law students who have mooted because that is a very common activity to undertake, particularly for those aspiring to the bar. But there are lots of other ways that you can demonstrate the skills that you would learn through mooting, through other experiences that you may have had elsewhere. As for the experiences that you should be highlighting more generally, you need to really think about what skills and really you think barristers have. You know, if I pick out some of the most obvious that come to mind for me, resilience. Think about how you can demonstrate that you're resilient. Think about your um, work experiences. Think about your social experiences. Think about um, situations that have happened at university, your exams, etc. All of these things can demonstrate ways that you are resilient. This is a naturally academically demanding job. So think about, you know, the research skills and your independent working skills, your ability to find solutions to problems. Um, and there's lots of different ways you can highlight that experience. Not everybody will have been a paralegal. You may have worked in a bar, you may have worked at the university help centre, you may have volunteered at the CAB. One of the things that I did whilst I was at university is I volunteered at a legal advice clinic at Age Concern UK. And so I had the opportunity to assist older people with mainly complaints and things that they had with energy providers. Um, and of course, that gave me skills for conflict resolution. Um, so what you need to really take a step back is and think about what are the main skills that you think a barrister requires, and then you need to sit down and you need to think about how you can demonstrate them from the experience you've got. I just say this, it's not necessarily related, it's also related to an earlier question, but I'm sure Angela will probably agree with me having been a recent applicant. I spent literally weeks and weeks refining my application. Weeks. I wrote out answers. It was slightly different because not everything was Gateway, but you could get an application form effectively with standard questions that were asked. And in fact, there's a good resource on the Bar Council on the Inner Temple website that provide a list of common questions. And I spent weeks and weeks refining my answers to common questions. Because if you think that you can effectively rock up at the end of January, fill in an application form and send it off 16, 17, 18 times, let me be clear, that's not the best way to present yourself in a pupillage application. Like anything, it takes time and it takes refinement and it takes a commitment to it. So um, start with a tree, if you like, about what all your experiences are. Write down around that bubble all of the things that you think may have added to that skill that you want to highlight, and slowly refine the sentence or the paragraph about how you can demonstrate those skills in a concise manner. Um, there is no one size fits all. I think that's right, isn't it, Cheryl?
I think that's absolutely right, Liam, and thank you very much for that. And that segues into something I wanted to talk about, which also is a question which is asked frequently, which is how many chambers should I apply to? Well, things have moved on since I did mine. I was pre any form of gateway. When I applied for mine, it was individual ones. There was no time, there's no specific transfer window like there is now. I made 75 applications for pupillage in 1 year because I was pretty determined. But it was easier to do because that was over a period of a few months. I had a beautiful color-coded spreadsheet, which I thoroughly recommend to everybody to keep a track. because you do need to keep a track of your applications. But in terms of the number of chambers to apply for now, there's a lot more information out there, so it's easier to target, which was much more difficult 28 years ago. And the answer really is as many as you can without losing quality. Because what you were saying, Liam, about polishing and so forth, 10 quality applications are going to have more prospects than 20 badly presented ones or 20 careless ones. 20 quality applications are even better. But if you have to choose for timing reasons between quality and quantity, target the chambers you want to go to and concentrate on quality. Start now if you haven't already, those of you who are watching, because may seem like quite a long time, but it's actually a very, very narrow window this year. So start now, use your Christmas break if you have one to practice. You have to be in it to win it. And the more quality applications you can make, the more likely you are to hit that sweet spot. And they do get easier, to be honest. The first one or two are the ones where you really struggle, and then you get into the swing of things, and some things can be recycled. So the answer is quality first, quantity if you can make it. But what if you perhaps do some really good applications and you don't quite make it this year? Liam, can I ask you this question? Somebody has asked this: is it wise to repeat parts of the applications from previous years if they've already gone through the application processes? What would you say about that?
Without wanting to sound too obvious, I think the answer is probably no. And I think if you take a step back and you think about it, you think of it like this. If you applied and you hadn't been successful, then you need to start to ask yourself why you hadn't been successful. And that's likely to mean that you need to look at your application. The other thing that will have happened is you'll have had a whole another year of life experience doing work or study or extracurricular activities, whatever it may be, that you can now draw upon to be able to enhance your application further. And I think that's a point you must consider, is that if I have not been successful, take a step back, look at your application and see where you think you may be able to strengthen your application, and then go and do that for that year to try and do so. I mean, I'm lucky. There's an example in my chambers where one of our now tenants I interviewed twice. The first time it wasn't their time to make it through. There were stronger candidates that year. That particular candidate asked very insistently for feedback about what they could do to strengthen their application. And they went away that year and they took on the feedback, and the following year got a pupillage, and they are now in tenancy at Chambers. And so what you really need to think about is what's missing and can I improve it? Rehashing a former application probably just isn't going to cut it. And I think just bear in mind this is that, not to want to be a bringer of doom or anything, but for every year you're not getting it, there are more candidates behind you. And so what you really need to be thinking about is what can I do in this next year to make me stand out when compared to the other people applying this year.
Yes, I agree with that. And the trouble is, if you're applying to the same chambers with the same application form, you may end up with the same marker. And they may realize that you haven't updated and upgraded, because you will have different experiences and you will have new things to add. And particularly if you didn't get interviews, your application form clearly isn't hitting the mark. So no, don't repeat it. Find something else. And Jola, is there anything you have to say on that particular question, or do you think we've covered everything?
I think you've covered it. I agree.
Marvelous. So let's look a bit more closely at the applications. There are questions about there are many questions about how to make an application outstanding and what distinguishes a strong application showing potential as a barrister beyond academic excellence. And these two are very closely linked. And my view, and I'm going to be coming to you two to ask you for yours in a second as well, is, is that an outstanding application will have excellent academics, or academics that are appropriate for that particular application. However, they're demonstrated, because your academics is not necessarily just your degree. There are other things you've done which will show that you have a strong academic or intellectual ability outside what you've done at university or at school. And you need to identify those and promote them. That's something that you can't, in effect, do anything about. They are what they are. It's the other things on the application form which is likely to make a huge difference. And that is the potential beyond the academic excellence. I would say, first of all, you need to really sit down and work out what you think makes a good barrister. Now, we've spoken previously about communication. You must be able to communicate, because certainly now communication is important, and communication is both written and oral. I would say you need to demonstrate a love of learning, and that you want to continue to learn, because this is a job where you should never stop learning. You never reach a point where I know everything. I haven't yet. I'm still working for that on that, but nope, I still go into court and come out thinking, oh, my opponent said something that I really liked the way they put that. Maybe I need to adapt mine a little bit. I see skeleton arguments where I can adopt something. It's not just learning about the law, it's learning about your craft as well, and it's constant. You need to demonstrate enthusiasm for the job, for yourself, for the chambers if possible, and an ability to answer the questions asked in such a way as to showcase yourself without boasting. And please don't do humble brag. It's spotted so quickly and it doesn't help you. False modesty, real red flag. If you're good, you don't have to dance around saying you're good, but don't go around saying you're lucky. You've worked very hard to get where you are. Don't undermine yourself. Liam and Joel, anything you would like to add to that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I've obviously never marked a pupillage application, but I think loads of different chambers have different criteria. When you really boil down to it, I think it boils down to aptitude, attitude. So attitude is things like you were saying, Cheryl, your attitude towards, I don't know, if you're doing crime, picking up a case last minute, continuous learning. If you're in a heavy commercial paperwork heavy practice, your attitude towards slavishly going through documents, sitting at a desk and mining through that. And aptitude is basically your capabilities to do the job. And so if you see it in those two terms, then you won't lose your way in your application, because you'll be able to focus your answers just around that.
Thank you. Liam, anything you'd like to add to that? I think it was a very good answer. Thanks, Angela. Appreciate it.
No, I agree with what you've both said effectively. There are more than one way to demonstrate your academics and your intellectual ability, if you like. And academics is not the only way, so I agree with what both of you said.
Right. And the other thing I think which comes up quite often, and again, we've had a number of questions about it, is the issue of extenuating circumstances, what they are, when they should be mentioned, when things shouldn't be mentioned. I mean, my view, and you may or may not agree with me on this, and I'd be grateful for your input on it, but my view is that extenuating circumstances, they need to be real ones. That is to say, they are reasons why something hasn't been done or why there's a gap in your CV, not an excuse for something that just wasn't done. So things like illness, late diagnoses of things, bereavements, earthquakes are fine. And in fact, during the COVID years and even now, I think there are very many extenuating circumstances arising out of the experiences of people who are at university, particularly the first couple of years for that year. But anything less than something fairly dramatic, I think you need to think very carefully about what you use or what you say about an extenuating circumstance and what you don't. This is a tough profession. It's tough intellectually. It can be tough physically sometimes. It's certainly tough psychologically. And there's points where you can't make excuses to a jury or a high court judge or your client unless it's something fairly cataclysmic that's happened. What's your view on that?
But want of not sounding too harsh,
Hmm.
you're not looking for a pity party. You're not looking for us to take sort of pity on you. If you had a particularly bad grade in a particular module because you didn't like it and you didn't apply yourself, well, that's probably not going to find much sympathy with your assessor, because there's plenty of tasks at the bar that none of us particularly like doing that we have to get on with and do. But we do want to know if there has been, as Cheryl said, something that has impacted you on on almost a visceral level that has prevented you from doing the best that you could do. We want to know because we don't want to penalize you for those things. But if you don't tell us, we don't know. Now it's a judgment call, and if you want to be a barrister, you'll have to start making them pretty soon on once you're into pupillage. It is a judgment call, and you need to think about is this thing that happened to me, or is this thing that prevented me from doing something or impacted my ability to do something so significant that I think it should be taken into account? If the answer to that is yes, then you should raise it, because nobody wants to filter somebody out because you didn't tell us about it. But missing the bus and not making to an exam is more likely to be a red flag than something for an accentuating circumstances. So really think, as Cheryl says, about
Mm.
did that thing really have an impact on my ability to perform to my best? And that's what we're really looking for.
Okay. And then there's a question in the live chat, which I think segues into this. How much detail do we think that should be given for extenuating circumstances? I mean, my view is you don't need to give too much detail. If you've got health problems, you can simply say you had health problems. You don't need to tell people. I have read some in the past which were almost uncomfortably detailed and not very helpful, to be honest. But I think you need to put enough detail that people realize, as Liam says, that it's a serious issue, which you don't need to give chapter and verse. You're not asking, as Liam said, for pity. You're simply saying, this is what didn't happen or did happen, and this is why. And you should consider this is why, because it's serious and anybody, in effect, would have been thrown for a loop by that. Angela, would you agree with that? Sorry, Liam, I'll come back to you.
I do. No.
Yeah.
I think it's the type of thing you need a judgment call for. So you might want to sense check your any opinions about extenuating circumstances with someone else.
Yeah. Okay. And there's one other here. I'm just going to deal with one other question here because, again, it comes in. Somebody saying, I'm guessing parenting is an extenuating circumstance. I'm not sure it is. I think it can be sometimes a reason why it's more difficult to do mini pupillages and that kind of thing. But if you want to do pupillages and come to the bar, you need to start dealing with those issues and thinking to yourself how you're going to deal with them. I think most chambers now, and certainly speaking for myself, we're very open when it comes to parental leave and assisting people. But at the end of the day, you still have to do the job. Okay. We'll answer perhaps some of the questions which are coming up later. We're going to come on to career changing. Somebody's asking that question, but one of the questions that is quite often asked is, would an application that meets other requirements, in other words, you've got your degree, be accepted if the applicant is currently on the bar practice course, or does your chambers only accept people who have passed the bar course? And Jola, what's it like with St Ives on that particular point?
St Ives, perhaps more rare than other chambers, recruits to start in the year of the application cycle. So if you submit your application 2026, it's to start in October 2026. And so you'd have had to at least be on the bar course.
Yes.
So being currently on the bar course is a positive as long as you finish by October next year. Being in third year, I'm afraid you'd have to wait until you're on the bar course to then apply.
Well, in our case, I can say for 3PB, I'll come to you, Liam, in a second, but in 3PB, you can't apply when you're still doing your degree. You have to really have completed your degree because our marking system doesn't look at A levels at all, so we do need to see the degree. But you can apply to us before you started the bar course, if you've got your degree and that gives you sufficient marks on your application form. We recruit for the following year, so we're recruiting next spring for 2027. So you can start the bar course or be halfway through your bar course and apply to us and still be considered. Liam, how about with you, Dean's Court?
You could effectively, my co-pupil got pupillage in his third year at university, so you can. I think two things I'd say about that. One, it's usually down to timing about when the pupillage is available to start. Because of course, if it's 1 year ahead, and you're in your second year, for example, then it's simply not going to be possible as to timing. But the other point I would just make is this, though. You put an enormous amount of pressure on yourself in third year if you secure a pupillage to start effectively 12 months later, because the pressure you're putting on yourself is you have to pass the bar course first time with everything, with no second chances, because if you don't, you may not be able to start your pupillage. And I talk from experience because that's what I did, and actually it worked all right for me. But that can be a massive additional pressure on your time when you are trying to focus on examinations, etc., and other things. And quite often now you find there is a year gap between completing the bar course and starting your pupillage. And that's kind of been designed, in my view, for good reason, because it allows you to, one, gain some experience in that year, but also it allows you to focus on the things that are important at the time, which is your study. Because a lot of pressure is added if you are thinking to yourself, I have to pass this year because I'm starting my pupillage in 3 months' time, as opposed to, okay, I've got some breathing space because I can revisit this exam in 3 months because I didn't do as well as I'd hoped. And that's fine because I'm not starting pupillage for another 12 months. So obviously everybody sets out to pass their exams the first time. I get that. But the bar course is hard, and don't underestimate how hard it is.
Yeah, I agree with that. We've got a number of questions here, so I'm going to probably dot around a little bit. But there's a question about what type of good work experience, what type of work experience is good to list on the applications, or should you just list everything so there are no gaps? Now, I'll come to both of you on this in a second. My view is you should list everything, because chambers will notice a gap. Once you've been at the bar for a while, you almost think in chronological order. It happens without knowing, and you will notice that there is a 6 months where nothing's there, and that will raise a question mark at the very least. So I would say everything. The question that was asked was, would it show discretion or adaptability if you only listed what you thought was relevant. And my view that is quite frankly, everything you've done is relevant or can be relevant. And you probably at the stage you're at don't know enough about the job to know what is or is not relevant, or what might or might not give you skills, because sometimes you can be surprised. How do you two feel about that? Angela, can I come to you first and then we'll come to you, Liam?
Yeah, I think it's a balancing exercise because some of the feedback I got was no one really wants to read a massive, endless list of work experience after work experience. But at the same time, you don't want to leave significant gaps, especially if you were actually doing something. So 3 months of your life, if you've spent that doing something, but you don't think it's relevant, you should put it anyways because you were doing something that's productive and that is going to probably tell a story as to how you've got from where you were to where you are now. I think in terms of things like mini pupillages and marshalling, then you can be a bit selective. I don't know if the gateway is still where everyone sees everyone's work experience. That is, every chamber sees the same work experience. But for any off-gateway applications that are not like that, then you might select your minis and your marshalling quite carefully, just the things that chambers might be interested in, and maybe one non-practice area mini to show why you've ruled something out.
Yes, I think the off gateway probably, but the on gateway, I would be tempted to put everything in. Liam, I'm going to come to you, but I'm just going to say what you can do, particularly with things which are repetitive, like mini pupillages. Don't do a separate section for each one. Do one section saying these are my mini pupillages between whenever you started your first one and the second one, and then just list them with bullet points so that you can see you've done them and highlight whatever you learned in them. What's your view, Liam?
I take the view that I would like to see everything in chronological order because, as both of you have said, it shows what you've been doing. But that doesn't mean I need you to provide skills and experience for everything. So, for example, if you spent Christmas working at WH Smith's and really, you were just there over Christmas to make some money, that's fine. You may have been a student. I don't need you to necessarily say that this is the best job you've ever had in the world and here's all the experiences you learned from it. But if you did 6 months at a law firm as a paralegal, for example, well, I want to know more about that because, of course, that is directly relevant experience. That's not to say that we should undermine the skills and experience you may have got while you did your temporary job at WH Smith's. But again, it's about making a judgment call. You need to make a judgment as to what skills can I highlight here and what is more important to my application.
I agree, and I think the other thing is, as much as possible, relate it to the skills necessary for a barrister. There's some helpful stuff on the I think the Bar Standards Board website about the qualities that are needed, and highlight the ones that apply to you. I
I
think
think
that really, really works.
I think that's absolutely right. There's been a few questions that I've seen actually
Yeah,
pop up. The
yeah,
professional statement is available at the
yeah,
BSB website, and
it
effectively,
is.
barristers are assessed specifically throughout their careers, but especially during pupillage, as to the professional statement, and that sets out the skills and experience that barristers are expected to at least have had or developed by
Yeah.
the time that they finish their pupillage. That's a really good place to start if you want to know about the skills and experiences you will be expected to have at the point you qualify as a barrister, because those are the skills and experiences that we're hoping when we look at applications you've started to develop or can develop from the skills and experience you've already got.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's quite an important point. Just moving on a little bit, because time is ticking on faster than one realizes. Um, we've got quite a few questions on career changes. Some of these, but from people with international experience, which we've dealt with, and some specific ones. So I'm just going to run through a couple of those questions because I think it will be quite helpful. So, Liam, um, Do you have any guidance? You changed careers effectively. How would you say is the best way to articulate or to set out the transferable nature of the skills from previous careers? We've spoken about the professional document, and that is quite a good starting point. But how would you say, for example, is the best way to put those skills forward, to identify them and put them forward?
I think the most important thing is structuring what you did and why it is valuable. Um, I don't know what it's like in both your chambers, but we are seeing an increasing number of career changes coming
Yes.
to the bar later on. Some much later. There's a tenant in my chambers who came to the bar in her early 50s. Me, slightly earlier on. I was 30 when I came to the bar, which is slightly earlier on, but still slightly later than some. Um, what you really need to make sure is that you're getting across the skills and experience that you have taken away from that employment. Many people have done a job for many, many years. In fact, three of our more mature career changers have all been teachers. Now, you might not think it, but there is a lot of similarities between being a teacher and being at the bar. You work in a high pressure environment. You should, and I expect, be able to explain that as a teacher. You are dealing with conflict. You are dealing with time management skills, and it's about, again, sometimes it feels like when you're answering these questions, you're repeating yourself, but I hope by doing so, you're getting sort of the flavor that's expected from chambers. All your experience is relevant so long as you are looking at the skills that you have learned. Because people come to the bar from all sorts of weird and wonderful places in the world and from careers, and they do so almost seamlessly because what they have built up is the skills that one would
Yeah.
expect that you're able to simply transfer from one profession to the next. And
I agree. I agree. Sorry, Lim, I was just
no, go
cutting
on.
across you there because we actually had a specific question from somebody coming as a career changer who'd been working as an NHS 111 healthcare advisor. What qualities should I highlight? Well, practically everything, I would think, in that particular case. And Joel, I don't know how you feel about this, but I would have thought the fact that you need to move fast, you need to make difficult decisions under pressure, that you need to deal with people when they're frightened, because people often forget our clients are very often frightened. They may come over as aggressive or difficult, but they're often frightened. They're in a strange. Is that I would have thought practically every quality from that would transfer over. What do you think, Angela?
No, I agree entirely.
Mm.
It's the thinking under pressure, but it's also the clear communication under pressure. If you're an NHS one-on-one worker, then what you say, you have to say it pretty shortish, sharpish, and
Hmm.
pretty accurately. So
Yeah.
I think that's a great job to
Yeah,
transfer to.
I think it's a very good foundation actually. Um, and yeah, there are a number of questions from those who are changing careers. I have to say, I'm also a career changer. I came to the bar. I'm not going to tell anybody how old I was when I came to the bar because you could then um, work out how old I am now, and that is a state secret. Um, but I came as a career changer, and I just think one of the most difficult things, because this is a question that comes up as a career changer, is that sometimes you have to break down and let go of things that have been quite important to you in your previous career, and that's really, really hard thing to do. Um, so you have to sort of systems that worked for you previously will not work for you at the bar. And you have to break them down, you have to abandon them and find other ways of working. You have to be open to the fact that you may have younger people who are younger than you telling you what to do or assessing you or being better at the job than you are because they've been doing it for longer and they've got the experience. And that can sometimes be quite difficult for some people, particularly if you've been very successful in a previous career. And I think it's something you need to gear yourself up for. and just accept that, particularly coming to the bar and as a pupil, you are not the person who's in control. In a sense, you are the person who is there to learn. So take every opportunity to learn and don't allow your own preconceived notions or your own, even your own previous achievements to get in the way, because sadly, I have seen that happen with people who weren't able to let go. It's difficult, and it comes over in interviews if you're inflexible. If Don't turn up, by the way, at an interview, and don't on an application form make out that you know everything, because A, you don't, and B, you'll have the entire panel sitting there. Well, if this person knows everything, what are we going to teach them for a year in pupillage? You're there to learn. Be open to it. I don't know if either of you got anything to add to that particular point.
I think the only thing I would add is this, Cheryl, is that um, please do not be put off by being a coming to the bar later than it being your straight through university. Some of the best and most skilled advocates I know came to the bar later on, having sort of cut their teeth doing other roles or other jobs, which then allowed them to take their skills and transfer them to the bar and have very successful careers. So don't think, oh, I'm too old, too long in the tooth, or I'm not going to be able to do it. You absolutely can.
Yeah.
Lots of people have, so don't let that put you off.
I think conversely, I would say as well, if you're coming straight through the traditional route from university, having maybe done a gap year, not had a lot of experience, don't let that put you off either, because you bring different skills, different ideas. And at the end of the day, we all want to do the same job. The route that we get there is not really very relevant. It's what we do at the end of the day, and what you can demonstrate on an application form and during interviews. And Jola, I think you had a slightly more traditional route, so as to speak. You got anything to
Yes.
say about that?
No, in many ways, the traditional, like I find it scary competing against an NHS 111 worker because I didn't have that. I didn't have that behind me. But as you say, at both ends of the spectrum, don't be put off at all. Um, know what you're bringing, be confident in that, and just try and put that forward as persuasively as possible.
Okay, and I've got a question about pupillage. It's not really specific to the applications, I suppose, but it is a question that arises, and I think it's something which might give people a bit of an insight into the application processes, insofar as you want to know what you're getting into, and what to prepare for. And of course, the more knowledge you can show of what you're getting into, the better. I often say to people, go off and explore, for example, the structure of chambers. How are chambers structured? How does it operate? Um, Identify the correct terminology to use. But the question, I think, which might help, is to both of you, and it's in two parts, or it's two sides of the same coin. First of all, what was the toughest period during pupillage for all of us? And secondly, what's something that candidates often underestimate about pupillage? So, Liam, can I ask you first?
Yeah. I think there are two toughest parts of pupillage, actually, not one. The first is when you first start, because you may well have your law degree or your GDL, and you may well have done your bar course, but none of that prepares you for what it's actually like doing the job and researching points of law for your pupil supervisor and referring to whatever your practitioner text is. In my case, it was the Red Book in the family courts, because when you have done it so far, you have done it purely to learn or purely within a controlled environment. And now your pupil supervisor may well be depending on you to find that answer to that point while you're sat behind him in court, and it's very different. And whilst you may have done, for example, in my case, family law at university, that's very theoretical. It's very different to how you would apply that on the job. And so that takes a little bit to get used to start with, in my view. The second hardest part, and Angela will definitely agree, Cheryl will probably remember as well, is when you get on your feet. That first week, actually the first 4 weeks running up to getting onto your feet is terrifying because you know it's coming, and then you've got to go do it. And from that point, you're likely to be doing it until you retire. And so when that first point, I mean, that is the culmination of many years hard work when you're starting to do your own cases and the pressure's on, you will have these awful thoughts about not being good enough or not being prepared enough. And I can tell you that first case will likely be the case you prepare the most your entire career, despite the fact there's probably only 30 pages in your entire brief and bundle. But you will because you are now responsible for somebody and you take it very seriously. That's not to say we don't as we get sort of more experience, but we get better about knowing what to look at and what's important and cutting the wheat from the chaff, if you like. But those two for me uh, stick in my mind as two of the most sort of intense periods of pupillage.
Angela, how about you?
Yeah, I think yeah, I agree with everything Liam said. But I think what was toughest is probably what I underestimated the most.
Mm.
And there were two things. We said at the start, organization. I put down when I was considering what I might say, diary management. Everything takes longer than you think, especially because there'll be lots of firsts. I don't think I've had so many first time doing this moments in a 12-month period in my life. So you really have to budget your time wisely. Um, I think also the leadership aspect of being on your feet, you're leading the solicitor, you're leading your lay client. If you do family law and you're for a local authority, you're leading a social worker, you're leading a team manager. You're, that idea of what does council say about this? What does council say about this? I'm like, I don't know. I've been in this 5 minutes, but you really have to step up into that leadership role, the assumption of responsibility because the box stops with you. So I think diary management and embracing the leadership, I think that was grossly underestimated by myself.
Well, it's so long since I did pupillage, and to be honest, they were very, very different experiences 29 years ago when I started my pupillage. So I think for me, it was still very much more shrouded in mystery when I started. So everything was terrifying. I think I spent my first month in a state of sheer terror and anxiety. But I got through it, and it was yeah. The whole thing was difficult. Don't underestimate how difficult pupillage is. It's a really strange year.
Gerald, can I just add something really
Yes.
quickly to that? And just so that people don't feel disillusioned.
Hmm.
Everybody in Chambers
Yeah.
wants you to do well.
Yes, they do.
And everybody in Chambers wants to support you to get
Yeah.
through it. It's not nobody wants you to fail. We've as a selective, as a Chambers,
Mm,
invested huge amounts in your sort of development and education and
exactly.
training.
Yes.
And so there will be points where you
Mm.
are overwhelmed, but I would say 99.9% of people will answer the phone to help you. So I don't, I know we're sort of giving you our pressure points, but everybody wants you to do well in Chambers during pupillage.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I think take advantage of it. I'm going to move on to one thing. We're actually starting to run out of time a little bit. We're not doing too badly on time. So I think where we're at now is that awful question that makes your heart sink when you get asked it, which you do very often on application forms, which is this: what are chambers looking for when they ask, why do you want to undertake a pupillage with our chambers? or why do you want to be a barrister? Is it even worse? But what level of in-depth knowledge or interaction do you think chambers are looking for with that question? And Joel, I'm going to start with you.
I think they're looking for an understanding of the work they do, how they are situated in the markets, how they fare against their competitors. In terms of ethos, anything they particularly value, uh, whether co-curricular, as in terms of their work or their practices, or extracurricular in terms of, I don't know, any initiatives they might or causes they might support. The more in-depth you can be about that answer,
Yeah.
the the better for you, basically. I think that goes without saying, but it goes back to the market research I was talking about, and
Yes.
it takes a while to basically garner all that knowledge. So it's only when you start to research the chambers over a period of time that you start to realize, oh, they emphasize this in their marketing, or uh, they are heavy on pro bono. They've got a pro bono champion, and this is something they push. Is that because it's a good way to get work, or is that because they feel particularly aligned with giving up their free time for a cause, and does that align with you? Because as well as trying to be a chameleon, which I think when I was writing my applications, I was probably guilty of. There's also a part of does this align with me? Do I actually want to partake in this ethos? So basically, to answer the question, what level of depth or knowledge are they seeking? The deeper, the better.
I think I would agree with that to a certain extent. I mean, our chambers is very large and very broad. So we don't expect everybody to know everything about everything we do. But if you can refer to a case that people have been involved in recently, or something that Chambers has done, and relate it to yourself in your application form, or why that ties in with one of your core beliefs, I think that works quite well. What about you, Liam? What do you think?
I agree with what both of you have said, but what I would say, particularly for my chambers, and it will apply to both of your chambers as well, I suspect, people want to know you are committed to geography. And by that, we want to know that you are going to live in the Northwest, for example, and want to actually practice from the location that you're applying to. I made reference to it earlier. Um, Pupillage takes a huge amount of time and resource, both financially and non-financially, from members and chambers, in supporting your growth and development to want you to become, in time, a productive member of chambers. We've selected you because we think you've got what it takes, and we think that you're going to fit into working with the people that are already working in chambers. And so we want to know that you are going to stay and be part of chambers. Now, nobody's naive to think that you will stay forever, although many barristers do stay forever at their set that they do pupillage at. But and I'll give you a prime example. If you live in London and you studied in London and you did the bar course in London and have no ties to Manchester, I'm likely to raise an eyebrow. And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't interview you if you have an outstanding application. But I would expect to question you relatively harshly on why now, after spending all of your time in London, you now want to practice and work in Manchester. Because my natural concern would be, oh, you're going to do pupillage and then you're going to go back to London. And sometimes that happens and it can't be helped. But the reality is, we want to know you're committed to the geography. That is a big factor for many chambers outside of London. And I don't know if you'd agree with that, Cheryl. I mean, I think it is.
Yes, I do. As we're chambers with now 7 centres, and we sometimes have difficulties, or in the past we had difficulties with people applying to one of our non-London centres and then jumping ship. So we do like to see. We do actually now insist that people work if they're offered tenancy. They have to stay for at least 2 years in the centre where they did pupillage, even if they want to shift to another centre within us. But yes, I think people are looking because pupillage has changed. So it's now an investment by chambers. They have to spend quite a lot of time and money on pupils. When I did it, 80% of pupillages were unpaid.
Yes.
So it was a completely different thing. You could have many, many pupils and you didn't really care too much about them. But nowadays you don't because we're really investing. So there's a question here which I find quite interesting because I'm in a little bit of two minds about it. It's, should you mention in your application that you've met barristers, that there are barristers you admire, or that you've met through marshalling from the chambers? Does it make any difference? Do you think?
Sorry, Andrew.
Thanks, Liam. No, I think. No, I don't think I don't think it can hurt as long as it's not name droppy. So if you are simply naming them for naming's sake, I don't think you're going to get very far. Um, so if there's a purpose to why you're naming them, then name them. Uh, with everything, make sure it's targeted, make sure it's purposeful, and make sure it's not someone who you've had a unpleasant interaction with, because people might go and ask that person for feedback. You want it to be a situation where whoever you mention might have something positive to say about you, I think.
Liam.
I'd agree. It's got to be some sort of meaningful interaction. And by that, let me give you an example. If you are at some sort of event in person at a university and you spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes chatting to that person, perhaps about their practice area or their chambers, and it's generally a meaningful conversation, then I think that you should can mention that in a way which is not necessarily beneficial to your application, but that it shows that you've got some insight into that chambers or their ethos or their the way that they work. I wouldn't expect, for example, people on this webinar tonight to say, "Oh, I met Liam Kelly at Dean's Court Chambers," because of course, um, this isn't the sort of interaction where you've sort of added any value to this meeting in the sense of I've not told you anything as an individual. We've not had a one-to-one conversation together. This has simply been an attendance at a webinar, which I hope you've learned some things from. But I'm not sure saying, oh, I attended that webinar with Liam Kelly is going to add any sort of credence to the application, if you will.
Yes, I think that's about right. We are running towards the end of the seminar at 7 o'clock. So can I thank you both very much, Liam? I know that you had to rearrange something to be here, and I'm grateful to you for doing that and demonstrating to everybody who's watching that this is part of the job. And indeed, my inadvertent need to turn my camera off a little bit and deal with an unexpected coughing fit also was a live example of how you have to keep going, and indeed how sometimes you have to take over when one of your colleagues has a problem. So I think overall, I hope that this has been helpful. We did have a couple of questions about AI. We don't really have time to talk about AI, but can I just say for your applications, don't. We'll probably pick it up. We're quite good at it. You need to do this yourself because you're going to be asked questions on it. And you can't use AI in your practice nearly as much as people think they can. It's dangerous. There are at least 2 people heading towards hearings at the BSB. And I believe that when you make your application, you have to sign a declaration that you haven't used AI. I believe that's come in. So don't, because that is a conduct issue. And if you use AI, say you haven't and you get caught out, that will probably be the end of your career. So in brief, having said that, I love AI. It's great. And it can be very, very useful, used very, very carefully. But in respect of applications, no, don't do that. So we're now at 7 o'clock. I'm afraid we've not been able to answer a great many of the questions on the Q&A because we've been a little bit busy doing the live ones. And we'd like to thank you all for attending. We will try and answer as many of them as we can afterwards. Angela, is there anything else you would just like to say to people who are watching?
Yeah, just to say thank you all for turning up. It's a difficult process, but hopefully we've been able to assist to some extent. And just best of luck, everyone.
Liam?
Similar. It's not an easy process. Some of you will get it first time, some of you won't. You've got to keep going, because you will get there in the end.
Thank you both very much. I'm going to turn off my camera and my microphone now. I do wish everybody luck. You do need a little bit of luck, as we said right at the beginning. This is not an easy process. It is sometimes called the Pupillage Hunger Games. I think that's a slight exaggeration. There are ways you can manage. We hope this has been helpful. Please do read all the resources that have been on the webinar chat. Check everything, and I wish you good fortune and a following wind. We can't give you all pupillage. Sometimes we wish we could, and I do end on that note. It may feel personal if you don't get an interview. It may feel personal if you don't get pupillage. It isn't necessarily. You may just have hit a bad spot. And I do encourage you all to keep trying and to do your best. And also, I go back to the basics. Clear, fluent English. Tell chambers what you want them to know. Tell them what you want them to know and make it relevant. And that will give you the best possible opportunity.